how I feel having watched Death Note. That was, oh my gosh,
my heart
dude.
hurt.
Yeah, that was.
Although after watching it, I wasn't as viscerally angry after watching than I was after watching Ready Player One. But I think it's because I had different expectations.
Yeah, there's so many things. But we'll hold off on that.
We'll hold off on that, yeah. What up, punks? Welcome back to another episode of the Pop Culture Punks podcast. I'm your host, Phil, and across from me is your boy,
Joshua.
This week, we will be discussing movie... It's so hard to say this every time for some reason, but movie adaptations of anime, kind
yes.
of.
Live action.
Live action adaptations of anime.
Correct.
And like we have done with other episodes, we will be focusing on a couple just to keep the conversation in its lane and not just go all over the place like we can tend to do. So we'll be talking about the Ghost in the Shell film, which is from 2017, and then the Death Note movie, which is a Netflix movie.
Yep.
And I think that was 2018, but I can't say for sure. Maybe it was 2017. I don't remember. But those are the two we will be discussing this week in depth. It should be a fun.
Get ready for another rant.
Another rant. Yeah, this is the ranty February or March or whatever month February. It is these days. But before we get into that, we'll talk about some stuff we enjoyed. So, you got any good recommendations for this week?
So, I honestly have not done a ton this week. I've just been I have been redoing the video thing for all our YouTube episodes, and so that's what we're going to be using from like our
if it's
Instagram.
Anything like the Instagram
it's
one,
basically a copy.
Snap, dude.
Yeah, it's basically
when I saw that,
like
it had like the certain aesthetic to it, and it made me like feel good. I was like, oh wow,
good.
This is next level.
Nice. So I've basically been working on that, but
cool.
Every Tuesday I meet in our church's small group. There's a son that I kind of like mentor, and usually we just like end up playing like Gears of War and hanging out, and so what we've been doing is we'll like eat dinner and watch an episode of Street Sharks, and then we'll play Horde mode in Gears 4. And
you had to get somebody to watch Street Sharks.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's hilarious because he's in 6th grade, and so he's like, what is this? And I'm like, dude, this is my childhood. Like, this is what it was like back then. He's like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, and just how corny it is. So, but it is absolutely incredible. Like,
that's
just
awesome.
Some of the stuff that happens. Like, it is the late 80s Ninja Turtles show is also kind of that way, but I feel like there's a level of creativity that's still in it that it's like, it's not as cringy. Whereas Street Sharks is one of those where rewatching it, I'm like, this show is so bad, but it's just, you can't take your eyes off it. Like,
yeah.
Just one of the things that it always does is whenever they're in trouble, like 2 seconds later, like the music will be like, ding, ding, dun, dun, and then they're like, oh no, and they're like, let's shred, and then it's like, ding, 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 and then they just start like kicking butt, but it's like 2 seconds apart, and so it's like all these weird music changes and everything.
I wonder if that show was like a
90s
reaction to like the Ninja Turtles show.
I think it was.
Because it just based on what you did right there was like, that sounds like the Ninja Turtles.
It was like the DC Marvel Cinematic Universe before that was a thing. It was like, oh, Ninja Turtles is doing something with mutant teenagers, so we should probably do something
with
too.
Mutant
sharks. So yeah, it's just, and the fact that they go shark mode underground through concrete and like just,
what?
Yeah, it's like they do like the shark fin thing where it's just like,
but it's in the concrete,
but it's like in the middle of the road.
Street Sharks taking Street Sharks to a whole new level.
It's absolutely amazing.
That's
but anyway,
great.
So yeah, he's just been laughing at like how bad it is, and he's like, I've lost a little bit of respect for you because you like this. I'm like, dude, it's so bad it's good. It's one of those things. So that, and music-wise this week, I have been on a huge Yellow Wolf kick. So I accidentally, a couple Fridays ago, was just kind of, going on a YouTube music rabbit trail, and I found that he had released some new stuff, and I was like, oh, snap. And, oh, my gosh, check out Bloody Sunday and Mountain Dew Mouth by Yellow Wolf. They're like two freestyles.
Mountain Dew Mouth.
Yeah, dude, they are... He's on another level now. Like, I always used to like in high school his earlier stuff, like his Radioactive album, and I think Trunk Music is one of his early ones. But like Daddy's Lambo, and he's just got some of these like obnoxious songs. Mm-hmm. But then he did Love Story, which I know people have kind of contentious opinions about, but I actually think it's fantastic. It's it's a lot of Western infusion, and just like some of the beats that they use are very like country. Like I think what is it? I think it's actually Love Story. Like the title track is probably one of my favorite songs that he's ever done. But so it's a very interesting album. And then Trials by Fire, which is the follow up, was kind of like similar. Like he's got some strange. He just went in a very interesting direction from like almost that early 2000s hood rap to like something very artistic and very unique. And now he's going back to kind of his earlier roots with the more like urban hip hop vibe to his sound, but coming with like the heat of like modern Eminem. So it's incredible. Right. Yeah. So I'm really stoked. So Trunk Music 3, I think, is his upcoming album. So these other songs, I don't think they're anywhere for even purchase or streaming.
They definitely weren't on Spotify, but they're on YouTube.
Yeah, they're on YouTube, but they're not on iTunes either, which was surprising to me that he hasn't put them out anywhere. But I think their main intention was just
it was like 2 weeks
hype.
ago they released them, I think.
Yeah, so it's been
Post Malone responded on like the 11th or something.
Yeah, so Bloody Sunday he takes some shot at Post Malone just cause,
and G-Eazy
it's great.
MGK a little bit, but not really.
Yeah, he
like
says
a couple lines,
his drop is that he says something about Trunk Music 3. You're gonna know how I feel about MGK.
Okay,
and so
he's probably got a whole song about
oh my
MGK.
gosh, you know it. Yeah, so it's gonna be great. So that's been pretty much it for me. So just jamming some Yellow Wolf, some hip hop nostalgia, and Street Sharks, baby. So
Dope.
It's now that it's finally like warmer than 20 degrees outside. I wore shorts today, and it's like 40. I think.
Let's go.
It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
So usually
I didn't wear a jacket. I just wore my flannel over here.
Usually when it starts getting warmer, that's kind of like when I start going back to more hip hop stuff because I just kind of feel like more energized. And usually in the winters it's like metal only because that's just what I'm feeling.
The brooding
stuck
angst.
inside all day. But
dope.
Yeah,
I haven't done a ton either. I was telling you this earlier, but I was excited today because I went to the comic store because I was out of town yesterday and it was Hellboy Day, which is the 25th anniversary of Hellboy's first appearance in comics. And Dark Horse was giving away a bunch of like posters, and there's a dope bookmark which is like his red like fist right-handed doom. And I was bummed because I was out of town yesterday, but I went today before this, and I got a bunch of stuff, so I was excited about that. And I also picked up a comic called The Grim Knight. It's a part of Scott Snyder's The Batman Who Laughs thing.
Interesting. I
haven't been following it because it's just I can't do continuity stuff right now because it's like there's so much stuff to keep track of. Yeah. I'm kind of like waiting till it's done, and then I'll probably go back and like read through the trades and try and kind of because it's kind of cool. There's like 7 or 8 different like Batmen that are like bad, evil.
Oh, interesting.
And one of them's the Batman Who Laughs, who has like it's hard to describe, but he's got like this metal like knight helmet almost.
I've seen that.
And he's got like that creepy like Joker mouth.
Yeah.
And then he's got like little like robins that are like monkeys or something on chains, and it's like very creepy. But this one that I picked up looked interesting because it's like it's called the Grim Knight, and it's the most dangerous Batman ever or something like that.
Interesting.
And it's basically what it looks like is like Batman, but if he was the Punisher.
Oh,
and, like,
dope.
He's got like giant utility belts and grenades strapped all to himself, and he's got like 2 machine guns.
Yeah.
It's called the Grim Knight. I think it's officially called The Batman Who Laughs, the Grim Knight. It's like a standalone 1 issue, like one shot, kind of like the origin of the Grim Knight.
Sure. Pulling it up right now.
So I picked that up.
Gosh.
I picked it up today. I haven't read it yet.
That looks incredible.
Yeah. And I've heard mixed things about it, but I just wanted to check it out because it's only like $4 for an issue of a comic like that. So
that does look that looks rad.
Yeah. So I picked that up. I'm kind of interested to go back once all of this is done because I think the official title of this whole series is called Dark Knight's Metal. Mm-hmm. So like everything is like stylized like 80s metal, sort of like just really intense like graphics and stuff. And there's like like I said, there's a ton of different Batmen that are like bad, and they all look super dope. So
sweet.
But yeah, I haven't been keeping up with it, but I picked up the Grim Knight just because it looked kind of cool. And then other than that, what else have I been doing? So I've been playing Spider-Man PS4.
I see Spidey.
I think I'm
gearing up.
Based on the thing, I'm 65% of the way done, I think. But I've been like, I've finished collecting all the backpacks. I finished taking pictures of all the landscapes or landforms or whatever you call those things. I'm working on the research stations right now, and I've got a couple more challenges left and stuff.
Have you finished the main story?
No.
Okay.
I think the 65% is technically just the main story.
Got it.
So I've been kind of like trying to truck through the main story, but
Sure.
also like I am like obsessed with collecting things in games. I knew
Yep.
I knew this was gonna happen. I knew I wouldn't be able to get through it because like I'd be like swinging to my next mission. I'm like, ooh, there's a backpack. I get to that backpack. Oh, there's one like right over there, and I'd swing to that one, and then like before I know it, I've got like 10 backpacks, and I'm like 3,000 kilometers away
Right.
from my objective.
Yeah, exactly.
And if like it's kind of funny because I won't get too much into it, but I've been finding that like I don't even use the fast travel feature just because it's so much fun to like swing,
Mhm.
even if it's like 2,000 kilometers away. Like it's just so much fun to
When
swing
you can
through the
get there
buildings.
fast too.
Yeah, so it's a
Definitely.
really fun game. Like I'm enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would because
Sure.
I've never been a huge like Spider-Man fan. I know
Mhm.
he's like one of your big two, but
That's all good.
it's after watching Spider-Verse and then
Yeah.
playing this game, like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the character of Spider-Man. So I'm really enjoying the game so far.
Definitely.
It'll probably be one of my probably not top 5, but it'll probably be up there for me. I think
Yeah,
as far as like video games go because they capture it so well.
for
So,
sure.
But we'll be doing that in April.
Couple weeks,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Month of superheroes.
So hopefully I can get through it before then and stop
Definitely.
collecting everything.
Yeah,
I think I already
absolutely.
got all the things you can collect. So.
Yeah, I think my big thing was the suits, and I don't know if I got all the suits, but like they have like the dope like 2099 suit you
I got
can
that
get.
one, yeah.
They've got.
I found that,
they
like,
added a few
For
too.
some reason, like even though the suits look dope, like I can't play the game without like
the main one.
either the main one or like the standard Spidey suit.
Sure.
So there's the one you start with, and then there's the one like the advanced suit.
Yeah,
And those are the two that I like have to play it with for some
that's
reason.
funny.
Like I tried playing with the 2099 suit because I was like,
Yeah.
this looks dope, but like it just didn't feel right to me for some reason. I don't know
No,
why.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah.
But yeah, I think I've unlocked up to, I think it's called like the aerial suit or something like
Okay.
that. It kind of looks like the Iron Spider suit, but
Mhm.
like green or something.
I think I know which one
It's
you're
right
talking
after
about.
that one.
For sure.
So I think I've got all the ones you can unlock without playing the main story, but I don't want to look it up because I don't want to spoil anything.
They kind of reveal themselves eventually, and
Yeah.
it's kind of
Because
fun
every
to see
time I
what they
complete a
do.
mission, I double check to see if I unlocked any new
For sure.
ones. And usually there's like one or two that I've gotten. So
Definitely.
it's fun.
Cool.
So I'm excited to talk about
That'll
it.
be
in a couple
that'll be a
weeks.
fun one. I'm hoping to.
We'll go back to being posi for a little while.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just been unfortunate. I think like
Yeah.
we kind of pigeonholed
technically,
ourselves.
yeah,
with-
we chose things that we knew we were gonna hate.
Well, and it's funny because like I didn't think I was gonna hate Ready Player One,
Yeah.
but then I did,
Yeah.
and then like,
But we knew
with this,
Well, at
this
least
I
with
knew.
this one, we chose one movie that was like decent, other than doing like Full Metal and Death Note. Because
Right.
I was reading things about Full Metal, and I was like, I'm glad we touched that.
oh
bullet.
yeah, that
I don't want
would've
to
been rough.
soil Full Metal in my mind.
Definitely. Well, I know technically also we had to reschedule what this episode was actually going to be, so that kind of changed it a little bit too. But
Yeah.
anyway,
We adapted.
you ready to dive in?
so
and
I
any
think we should
disclaimers?
start. Yeah, disclaimer similar to last week. I think it was last week. We're not technically reviewing the movie itself,
Mhm.
although that'll probably get
We'll probably-
sprinkled in
yeah,
throughout because we
making
can't help
fun of-
ourselves.
Yep.
But our main focus is again kind of analyzing like how the anime translates to the live action and like missteps and what they could have done differently. And not that we're experts or anything, but we like to talk, so that's
Definitely.
what we're here for.
Yep.
I think we should get Death Note out of the way. I think we should.
I
Or do you
agree.
think we should end with that one?
I don't know.
We might be a little bit more positive about Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, let's just get in on Death
Let's
Note, 'cause
let's go in.
that.
I'm going Yellow Wolf on Death Note.
Oh my gosh.
So
I'm just
let's-
gonna come out and say it. This was I've only seen 2 movies in my lifetime that I have vehemently hated. Usually, even if I really didn't like it, I can be like, I don't regret watching it though. Like it was still worth my time. Savages, which came out in like 2012, 2011, I think. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. Savages. And Death Note, the live action. This movie sucked. Oh my gosh. I could not believe how bad this movie was. And
Yeah,
it
I
is not
haven't-
even being like overly critical. It's not just being like, well, you know, again, kind of with Ready Player One. Well, it didn't stay true to the anime, so that's why it was bad. It was just bad. Like,
Yeah.
it just screamed like teenage drama with like bloody gore. That's all it was.
It
And it's just-
basically felt like a cheap knockoff of Twilight. And like,
yeah.
I would agree with you. I haven't seen a movie in a long time, and this is usually because I'm pretty selective. I think because of the podcast, we've been stepping out of our boundaries a little bit.
Yep.
I tend to be pretty selective, but even then, like when I watched Suicide Squad in the theaters, I came out like thinking that was pretty cool. I enjoyed that, and it wasn't until like retrospect that I thought about it that was like everything about it was uninteresting in a sense. But this movie, it was like, I mean, I went into it with like very, very, very low expectations. I was like, this is going to be utter garbage. So like, I wasn't let down like I was with Ready Player One in a sense, because I already knew that it was just going to be trash. So I was just kind of getting through it. Yep. But yeah, I would not recommend anybody watch this for themselves. Like, just take our word for it, please.
Literally, unless you want,
unless you're very, very interested in it.
Unless your time is not valuable and you know it, just
if you don't value our time, then take this as a warning.
Stay clear of this movie.
So,
good freaking Lord.
To take a little step back, just to kind of frame the discussion, sure. I'm curious, what are the aspects about the anime that you enjoyed when you first saw it? Because that might help frame the discussion going into this, so it kind of keeps it grounded.
Definitely. So to me, what made the anime, which if you haven't watched, absolutely watch that. It's really short. It's only
37
about
episodes.
37 episodes at about 20 minutes apiece. I think when I first watched it, I'd always, again, it was kind of one of those shows where I think when it came out, it kind of got picked up by all the hyper goth kids, and it was just kind of like an emo show. And so I had this perception of it for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually watch it all the way through until my sophomore year of college. So I was really late to the show. But I think what got me was at that point in time in my life, I was really gravitating towards creative storytelling, and especially stuff that was very cerebral. And to me, Death Note was just a mind game. The entire show is a mind game, and some of it is kind of like sleight of hand, and some like narrative elements that they're like, okay, we're gonna do this, and then like this happens, and it's all these triggers. But it's so methodical, and Light as a character, I think there's this fascinating thing that the show did where it takes Light, who's this young high school kid who gets this power in the Death Note, which basically lets him kill anyone he wants if he can see their face and knows their name.
He knows their name, yep.
And those are basically the major two criteria. And there's a whole bunch of other rules, but they're consequential when it's important, kind of thing. He goes on this quest to basically rid the world of evil, and immediately I was like, oh snap, like this is very fascinating. Like this all of a sudden it turns into like, oh, it's not just a kid who's like, yeah, I got picked on, so I'm gonna like murder a bunch of people, which is what the live action did. It turns into like, he's like, I have a duty now. My duty is to rid the world of evil. Like I can't pass up this opportunity. And so then all of a sudden, he starts like killing off criminals and killing off all these like really terrible people, and just how the show progresses, and just the stakes that are constantly ebbing and flowing, and just how some of those moments happen are so much fun to watch. And just some of like the left hook things that come out of nowhere and change stuff.
So intense.
Oh my gosh, especially like in the pretty close to the end, I think.
Yeah.
Something happens that is pretty like, oh my goodness, it's just so good. It's good.
Like, it's one of those things where like you're just amazed at how each character can kind of like think like 10 steps ahead of the other, and obviously like they can because the person's writing it that way.
Right.
But it's written in such a good way that you don't realize
it doesn't feel cheap,
bamboozled by the show in a sense.
Yeah.
And like it doesn't feel cheap. Like you feel like the payoff every time is like, oh, like every episode you're just like, oh dang, I'm on the edge of my seat, like what is gonna happen next? And like I even rewatched like, I think I rewatched like 20 some episodes. I didn't make it all the way through again, but it's so fun to watch, even when you know what's gonna happen. It's just like,
absolutely,
it's so intense.
Definitely. And it's fascinating because I think the show does something that, in terms of the pacing, I think that the book for Ready Player One did, and I think that's kind of why I was drawn to the book. Is it gives those moments, you had said that in the episode, is it feels like when people fail, they deserve to fail, and when they win, they actually thought ahead and outmaneuvered people in the moment to actually win. So you're kind of like, oh snap, like dude knows, like dude gets it. Whereas I think bad narratives are things that tend to not be as quality, that try to do things like that, where it's leading you on and stuff, is it just gives you so much information, and then stuff just like magically happens for people, and then it doesn't feel earned. And especially for you as a viewer, you're like, I could have told you 20 minutes ago that was going to happen just because it has to, versus it being like, I don't know if he's going to make it out of this situation.
Exactly.
So like, I think, and minor spoiler, I guess, but I think it's one of the episodes where Light gets the Death Note back, because you can do a thing.
He's got like that little stopwatch.
Exactly. Yeah. So he can like basically rescind ownership, and so he forgets everything. So the police arrest him. They're investigating him. They're doing all this stuff, trying to break him down. And eventually he like gets out and proves that he's not Kira. But then he like maneuvered the situation in the future, or like set it up so that he'd have this piece of it in his notebook, and that he could actually like regain ownership by touching this slip of paper that he tore out of it.
Yep.
And then like get away and still get back. And it's just like things like that where I just remember that moment of like, oh my gosh, he really did forget. And then you're like, how are they gonna do? Oh
yeah, like
snap.
he thought so many steps ahead.
Exactly.
And like, just to be able to write that, even like, obviously he's writing that far ahead, but just to be able to create such a complex way of like doing things is crazy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's I really enjoyed the show. I remember my senior year, I think, because I that was when I discovered Attack on Titan, and I binged it in like 3 days or something like that. Yeah. And then I went and I watched Death Note, I think, was the second one I watched. And I remember like the cages at Memorial Library or whatever, I would like go there and do my thesis or whatever. And I just ended up watching Death Note all day, like Saturday or something. And like in the library, I'm like, I should be doing work, but this show is just addicting.
Definitely.
And yeah, I love its play on like the ideas of justice and legality and stuff, because Light's character is a high schooler, and like a lot of the ideas he has are things that we've all thought about in the same. And it's kind of like the Punisher. Like, on one hand, you're like, you can understand why he's doing what he's doing, but on another hand, you can see why it's wrong.
Right.
But there's still a part of you that's like, but they're murderers and child rapists and like this kind of thing. And this kind of takes it even further, where like it's this high schooler who gets it, and I think he's studying to be like doing something with law or something. He's just a really smart, basically like valedictorian, like super motivated high school kid, and he kind of like gets this sense of duty and justice, and it goes way, way out of hand. But because, and then the show kind of works with this, with Elle being a very similar type of person, but like they have different ideas of what isn't justice.
Exactly.
And so like they keep touching on the fact that Light has a very like juvenile or like immature.
It's like kind of shallow
sense of justice.
Yeah, it's like a shallow.
It's
sense.
a very black and white, like, but he doesn't draw a line. And with somebody like the Punisher, like the Punisher still has a line that he won't kill people who will stand in his way, if they're not bad, which still isn't a good thing. But with Kira, like he gets to the point where he is willing to kill people who are just standing in his way of like becoming a god, basically.
And I think that's the interesting part that the show capitalizes on, is it takes forever for that to build up. And that moment when he's willing to do that doesn't happen until the very end. When he like, there's like a switch that goes off where it's kind of, he's literally like, I'm either going to get caught or I need to kill this person. And that's when it happens. And after 20, I don't remember exactly when it occurs, but it's in the later third of towards the end of the show. And I think that's when it's like, okay, the game's coming to an end, because like this is his breaking point. Like who he has tried to create himself to be in the eyes of, all the people who are worshiping him from a distance and all this stuff. And even amongst, all the people he's around constantly, he's falling apart and he can't take it anymore in a sense. And that's interesting, because it's like, what happens? And I think that's something that, they don't dive into the Punisher, just because I don't think that's part of his character, but when you have that absolute authority, how much pressure comes with it. And I think it's a slow burn across the entire series to where it finally breaks and he just mentally can't handle it anymore. And then there's that fall off, and then, the show ends with, spoiler, him losing, essentially.
Although there's a couple movies that change the ending. I haven't seen them, but
there's
one where he actually becomes a god, I think.
Oh, that would be interesting.
And I think there's one where Elle lives.
That would also be interesting.
Yeah,
I kind of
that was the one part about the show that I was like, I wanted to see Elle like outsmart him, but in a sense he kind of did, because those kids were like his like proteges or whatever. Yeah, that's the same school or something. And after that point it got a little bit weird to me, but I think the show ended in a way that was satisfying in a
Yes.
sense, because like
Yeah.
it felt like that was the inevitable conclusion.
Definitely.
There was never any doubt he was going to get caught. It was more
Yeah.
of like, how are they going to finally get this dude who has like absolute authority and
Yep.
power over like everybody who
Definitely.
he can see. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's the show.
That being said, I think for me the first part that irked me about the movie before we get into any of the story stuff was I think the characters were, well, even before that, I'm going to get into, I think this movie could have been interesting. I think the way that America is set up, like, I feel like, I don't want to get too like socio-political here, but I feel like our society is very obsessed with the idea of punishment
and justice and
punishment
what is
and
correct.
justice and capital punishment and all these things. And like, I feel like having this set in America is ripe for like telling a decent story about like a similar concept. I think the first misstep they made was just trying to retell the Japanese story in America.
Yeah.
I think they should have just had an American get the Death Note and then tell a completely different story about the Death Note and how an American would use it differently than a Japanese person.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could have been really good, actually.
Yep.
If they wouldn't have tried to like make an amalgamation of this, because like what the thing that they gave us, I was like, it's kind of like you always say when we like analyze these things is like, who signed off on this?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I could write better than this.
Yeah.
And I'm not even that good of a writer yet. Like,
Yeah.
I could probably come up with a better idea than this and like do it better. And I'm not claiming to know about all the politics behind these things. And Netflix was probably just make
it.
Something and get it out there. Like,
Yeah.
people will watch it. And we
Sadly,
watched
they
it, so I
did,
guess. But
and I regret it.
yeah.
But
Yeah, I think the first misstep they made, just top level, was like
Yeah.
such a wasted opportunity. Because like, whitewashing aside, I think like they could have just rewrote a new story in an American setting with American ideas and stuff like that.
Definitely.
And I think it would have been interesting
Yeah.
if they did it right. I think what they did was just like, if anything is whitewashing, this movie is whitewashing.
Yeah.
Because, like, they literally just tried to take the same story and make it into like an American high schooler finds it, and
It was just bad.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the things that stood out with this movie that to me was really disappointing is that the show is so nuanced. Like it never like the conversation around the show, and I think this is why I loved it so much, is that very few people in the show are black and white. Like, a lot of them have, you know, they're toward one end or the other, but there's always a question that they wrestle with in their decision. Like, Light's dad is like, everyone on the force is kind of like pro Kira, but like he can't just go around killing people. But at the same time, like, our society is getting better, like, but I have to stand by these principles that as a police officer and a chief, like, I'm choosing to abide by, and that is my ultimate guiding principle. And so regardless of whether or not this is good for us, I need to have my standard and live by it.
Yep.
And so almost all of a sudden, it's almost kind of this like commentary on, you know, relative truth and like, what does that look like? And what does it look like when, you know, you have the idea of like the ultimate moment in a person's life, which is death, you know, and like leading to death. And then you have someone who's a high school kid who's immature and very brilliant, but immature, gets the hold of that power and gets to decide who gets to live and who gets to die.
Yeah.
And people who do agree with him, people who don't agree with him, people who are kind of like, I don't really know. Like, this is kind of confusing.
Yeah, I agree. I think of all the things in the show, like the dad for some reason was like my favorite part about it.
In the movie?
In the movie, yeah.
And that was the thing, is like everyone in the movie, I think I wrote in the notes, I was like, the best part of the whole movie is when I thought Elle was going to die, or Light was going to die. But I said the best part of the movie was when, Mia, like, that was the best part of the movie, is when she died. And like, when they're both falling from that giant thing. I was like, please kill them. Oh my gosh.
So like, I think like one of the parts initially that kind of ticked me off, like, I actually enjoyed like the opening scene. I know you put a note about the notebook falling from the sky and stuff, but like, I think that's how it happens in the show. Like, the notebook just falls from the sky.
It does, but I think again, and this is a more technical thing, and I'm not going to dwell on it too long, but I remember watching that moment, and I was just like, that was the most cheesy forced thing I've ever seen.
It's a
I
weird,
think literally
weird way
what
to frame
happened
it. Yeah.
is I don't remember in the show, and maybe you just watched it, so you can correct me. But I thought in the show that like there's more buildup where Ryuk is like, you know, kind of bored and he like throws it in. And so there's kind of this like lead into it.
Yeah.
And when it lands, like Light just kind of finds it. Like he doesn't like, whereas in the movie, I felt like what happens is they're all sitting there and it's kind of establishing him as like the outsider high school kid. And all of a sudden it starts like thundering and like the wind is blowing.
Oh,
you like can't
yeah.
see. And
Yeah.
then it like hard cuts to this like book flying in his screen.
Yeah.
And he's like, what is this? So that part was like why it was just like that's
in the
that's
show
bad.
in the show he's sitting in class and he sees the notebook fall like out in the courtyard and he's just like and after class he like goes and looks at it and then he picks it up, puts it back down, walks away, and he's like, this is stupid, and he like walks away, but then he comes back. And so I feel like in this show, like they don't, like you said, like he's a smart kid, but they don't really like give us any other than the fact that he's doing everybody's homework. Like, why does that make him smart in a sense? Like they don't establish his character at all. Like the only reason I make assumptions about his character based on what I already know about who Light's supposed to be.
Right.
But like, why should I believe, like they never gave me a reason to believe that he's smart. They never gave me a reason to believe he has any sort of principles about anything like the anime one has, whether or not his principles are good or bad. Like this Light is just like some dumb kid.
Right.
Who like happens to do other kids' homework and is bullied.
Yeah.
And somehow that becomes even that could have been interesting, but they didn't lean into that.
Right.
In a sense, like
Yeah. Well, and oh gosh, I have all these gripes in my head flying, and I want to be productive with addressing them. So I think the biggest flaw with this movie is exactly what you said, and just to kind of add on to what you started the conversation with, which is they missed an opportunity to have a very nuanced discussion in a new setting.
Yep.
And it's interesting because I feel like in the show, which is based in Japan, it isn't as culturally based, I want to say, but it's been a couple years since I've watched it, so I don't remember if there's anything that they literally kind of draw from Japanese culture that drives Light's decisions or like influences how the culture is accepting him.
Not necessarily, I don't think. I don't know a ton about Japanese culture, but I always kind of assumed that they were using Japanese ideas of justice and stuff.
Okay.
Which are very similar to ours, I think, in a sense,
mm-hmm.
because it's a Western country in whatever you want to define as Western. But I think in that sense it is. But other than that, there's not a ton of stuff that I picked on as an American watcher,
right?
I suppose.
So to me, what they should have done is they should have picked something, and maybe a few things, depending on how much time they had, to really dive in deep. And instead of making, especially, and it's the same freaking thing that happened with Ready Player One, is why are you trying to tell 37 episodes worth of content in an hour and a half?
Yeah.
Like, what idiot thinks that's a good idea? You can't do that. Like, it's not a matter of like, oh, well, we'll just kind of, chop some things out and like move things around. No, like you have to tell a completely different story, or at least adapt it in a way that fits your constraints. And I think they went for the macro, Light's going after every villain in the entire world. And so it was like, when you do that in that short of time span, everything feels rushed, which is the exact same effect that Ready Player One has, is you're just like flying through it and you're like, wait, what's happening? And like, why is this way now? But they should have picked something, and I wonder if the reason they didn't do this is because it could get real hairy really quickly, and especially when this came out, it was like the height of outrage culture.
Yeah.
I think. But there's some topics that could have been very, very poignant, I think, using the creative fictional set pieces that Death Note has. And I think, like there's a whole narrative in the Death Note like lore, I feel like, of like multiple humans have had the Death Note and like lost it, or
I mean,
like,
I think
Ryuk's
like
done this a couple times where he like quote unquote loses his notebook and then like kind of goes along for the ride to like see, in his like tagline of humans are such interesting creatures and things like that. And so if they would have done something where, let's say like bullying, I don't think you could do things like something like that, because I think that gets really dicey with.
Well,
like,
and they already tried to do it in the show, and it was bad.
in the movie.
Like his first victim is just a bully.
Right.
Like
well,
what?
And that was
how did you decapitate a dude and not feel anything about it? Like they didn't establish that his character was like emotionless and didn't care.
I
about
literally
people.
think they were trying to insinuate that he and Mia were psychopaths or sociopaths.
Yeah, but like I had no reason to believe that other than the fact that he just decapitated some dude. But like
it was just like, oh,
so
snap!
you are
like,
a psychopath.
Yeah.
But like I'm not interested in seeing a psychopath pick this book up, to be honest.
Right.
Like, and I never believed Light Yagami was a psychopath. I just believed he was misguided. Like he was
at least
misguided
in the
youth.
show. So
In the TV show,
differentiating the
yeah.
TV show versus the movie.
Light
Exactly.
Turner is the movie.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the movie, yes, and I think that's the thing that the movie had a huge. Oh my gosh, it was just abysmal. He doesn't have any driving principle, and that's exactly what the show is based on. Is that everyone in the show has a driving principle that either has them on the side of Kira, aka Light, or against him.
Yep.
And all those principles are very different, and that's what makes it interesting. Is you have L, who's just like, no one should have this authority. You shouldn't. Like, I'm bringing you in. Like, you just shouldn't have the ability to just kill whoever. That's just not how this works.
Yep.
And Light's like, well, sorry, dude. I'm making the world a better place. Either get with it, or I'm going to find you, and I'm coming for you.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, it's like the police get involved, and then there's this cult that starts for Kira, and they're like, all this stuff. And then there's people capitalizing on the cult, and people pretending to say that they're Kira, and then people fearful of him actually being Kira. And like, there's this whole culture that is all of a sudden changed dramatically by all these battles of ideas and guiding principles. And this movie was those were gone. It was gone. He was like, oh, this kid bullied me and like knocked me in the water in the rain, and like, so I'm gonna murder him.
Yeah.
And then it was just like, oh, I actually killed him. I guess the book works. Like
care at
that was
all, yeah.
he just like, he doesn't care at all. And I was like, to me, that's the exact moment he should either be throwing up or like bawling his eyes out or like menacingly like laughing or something.
Yeah.
Like
he just
have
looked.
him
He was
do
like
something. He just was like
looking out the window at it.
oh my, like that was it. That was his only response.
Yeah.
I'm like, what am I supposed to learn from that? That he just has no human emotion, or like, and then he goes home though, and he's gonna berate his dad about like, well, if I had the opportunity to kill my mom's killer, I'd go after him. And it's like, you dweeb. Like, I just wanted to punch him in the face the entire movie. It's like, you are this self-righteous, snotty, horrible person, and I want you to die. I want you to lose. I want you to lose right now. I want Ryuk to just get you. Like,
yeah.
And that is, and maybe, and again, that's something that could have been really, really interesting if they tried it differently, where it's like, all of a sudden, maybe L is the one that you're supposed to root for, which you kind of are in the show too, where you're like, oh, like, I kind of want Light to win, but like, if he doesn't win and L gets him, like, I'd be kind of satisfied with that. But with the movie, it was like, who am I rooting for?
Yeah.
Like, the dad and L are like the best characters in the entire movie. Like,
and even L, I didn't like that much because his character went off the rails at the end. Like, it was doing very erratic, irrational things.
And
like,
again,
like running after him with a gun. I'm like, what the heck?
Right. And again, it was like, I don't understand what this movie is. I don't get it. Like, you're not doing your material justice, which again, it doesn't need to be a carbon copy from the show, but it needs to tell a cohesive story that actually makes sense, and the characters' motivations and their decisions actually need to make sense, and not a single thing that happens makes sense.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I agree. I think there's so many things that were just missteps in the movie, like the Mia or Myra, whatever her
frick her name
whatever
was.
her name was.
Yeah.
That whole thing was weird. I didn't like Misa.
I think it's Misa
from
in
the
show.
anime.
Yeah.
I liked how her character was used, but I didn't like her character because
I agree.
It was just really awkward. Like, I remember I was watching it and Evan was there too, like just kind of like in the background, and she's like, what is wrong with this girl? Why is she so like acting so weird and obsessed with this dude? Like, why is she saying she loves him after like a day or something? And like it was just a weird dynamic, and they kind of like did the same thing. Just thinking about this, like, he's like sitting on the bleachers, and this is the movie.
Yes!
This is the movie I'm talking about.
Freaking gosh!
He's like he's sitting on the bleachers, like looking all brooding and angsty, And he's been kind of like eyeing her up like throughout the movie so far.
As soon as the movie started, that was like one of the first couple shots. Is him like eyeing up this girl from.
And he's
distance.
like sitting in the bleachers, and I don't know, it's like gym or something. Yeah. And she like comes over by him.
Oh my god!
And she's like, "What are you thinking about?" Or something. I don't remember exactly how it went down.
What is that? Nothing.
And he's like, "Nothing." He's like, "I can't
like,
tell you about it." And she's like, "Oh." And he's like, "Actually, I can't tell you about it. Let's go." And they like, I'm like, "Wait,
come with me."
That Light would not have shown this to anybody. Like he, and then he just like gives in immediately to this girl he doesn't even know. And like, okay, I get it. He's a high schooler and he likes a girl, but like you're like, the Light in the anime would never have risked his like.
No, he would have murdered her.
Yeah,
like, just for asking.
And he like shows it to her and shows that like, oh, I'm the one who decapitated this person, and now I'm gonna show this myself. Like getting this guy to shoot himself in the head, like who's standing up this thing or whatever. And she's like, "Whoa, that was you?
That was cool.
That was cool." I'm
cool.
Like, "You guys are psychopaths."
Exactly.
This is not interesting.
Exactly.
Like, and I think I think the interesting part about this discussion, I think, is the macro discussion about like what went wrong with it, like setting wise and narratively, because I think, like you said before, there are a lot of interesting things about America, like corporatism and like people hiking up AIDS drugs, and like you could have played with things like that to like there are people nowadays who say that we should like lock people up who do that kind of stuff, and like kind of like playing on those ideas of like justice and how do we find justice for people, and like how do you decide how many people a person is killing to the point where you can like justify killing them, like, and you could have somebody like, oh, this person, like because of what this person did, they're like killing millions of people, or like they're killing poor people, like, you know, like kind of stuff like that, where like it's a different cultural setting, but they didn't act like it was in a sense, in any meaningful way, because they did have the bullying thing, which I think bullying could have been an interesting way to like play up this character's warped sense of justice. Like I think there are a lot of people who probably get bullied and grow up having like a confused sense of like justice and retaliation and retribution, and people who haven't dealt with that kind of thing. But like they didn't do any of that in any meaningful way. They just like gave us a character who's a complete psychopath, and like again, that's to me that's not interesting in this type of setting. Like nobody is really that interested in seeing a psychopath get this kind of power, because it's more interesting when, like you said with the anime, when the person has a strict guiding principle that they refuse to abandon. In a sense, that's what superheroes are. Like we're interested in superheroes not because they're like all powerful, but because they have restrictions, because they're restricted by their morals. That's why Batman is interesting. That's why the Punisher is interesting. Like, and I think this character in this movie, because they abandoned that, like he just wasn't an interesting character, because like
definitely
there was no reason I should care about him. Like he didn't protect the book very well like Light did. He didn't go out of his way to make sure people couldn't find it, or like he just showed it to this girl after like 2 days. And like
when he doesn't do anything meaningful, like the first kid he kills, first off, they completely effed up with the whole Final Destination style, like he gets beheaded. It was like, dude, really? Like, why would you do it that way? Like, and I'm speaking to the writer,
Light specifically in the anime used heart attacks for a long
constantly.
time. Yeah,
and so to me, it's like that was the most childish, juvenile, and I'm talking whoever wrote this movie.
Yeah,
that was the most childish, juvenile execution of the ideas behind the show.
Yeah, the show's never like, about like gore and blood.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Like,
it's about a guy subtly killing people in a way that is almost so believable that it's untraceable. And then all of a sudden, the only reason that L even comes onto the scene is because he's like, it's kind of suspicious that all these guys in cell block C are having heart attacks, huh? And everyone's like, well, I never thought about it. You know, and so like, then it becomes this thing where he's like, maybe there's someone in the prison guard who's like poisoning these dudes, or maybe they're just all dropping, or maybe there's someone behind. That's when the intrigue starts. And this movie was just like, no, we're just going to brutally murder all these people and we're going to have them die in the most horrific. And it's like, that's never what it was about. And not that it needs to be an exact carbon copy of the show again, but the whole purpose of what Light is supposed to be doing is fighting back against evil. One of like the first places that he just completely butchers from a distance is like a strip club or like some dance club. And I just remember like the camera going in and like being just like bloody bodies everywhere. And I was like, what is this? Did like Freddy and Jason come out and like go have a fun time at the club last night and they just like got drunk and murdered everybody? Like, what is this? Oh, I think the movie just was completely unhinged morally in a sense. Yes,
and not because people are being brutally murdered. Like, I've watched The Punisher. I'm fine with that sort of thing. But like, there was just no reason for it. Like,
right.
None of what Light was doing made any sense. And like, I can't even like discuss the movie in any meaningful way because
I don't know what
there's
to
nothing
say.
There's nothing about it that is like redeemable in any sort of sense, because even like Ryuk, while he looked dope visually, his character was completely wrong. Like, Ryuk was not menacing in the anime at all. He didn't ever try and sway Light really from doing anything against what he would already do. Like, he was just kind of there to like watch and observe, and he would laugh at how stupid humans are and stuff. But like, they just took him and made him like menacing and creepy and like, I don't know, it just felt like they were trying to make like a horror movie kind of.
But a very, 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 very bad horror movie.
And so like, even things like Ryuk, who looked cool, like they just executed it poorly. Mia was executed poorly. I kind of liked the dad, but even then it was just like they didn't do enough with that. And like, to be honest, I didn't like, when it got to the point where he realized he would have to kill his dad, otherwise he would get caught, like, I thought he was going to kill his dad.
I did
because,
too.
like,
yeah,
his character was a psychopath.
Based on the entire movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, the fact that he didn't kill his dad I was kind of like, I mean, I don't want his dad to die, but at the same time, like, you've led me to believe that this dude is going to kill anybody at any point. So, like,
right.
Yeah. And so, like, it was inconsistent. And the only, like, kind of cool part was at the end when he like orchestrates this whole thing where like guy walks out of the river at blank time, picks up the death note, brings it to the hospital, where like that there in a sense felt like what Light kind of did, but like they didn't do any of that until the very end where he like orchestrates this whole plan. I'm like, where was this smart calculating dude the entire movie? Like,
and that to me is the biggest problem, is that exactly kind of what I started with is they just didn't know what they were doing. Because to me, it's like, yes, that moment was from the show, but the entire rest of the movie, you've showed me that Light is like this crazed, hormonally driven teenager that has no idea what he's doing or what his own moral compass is. He's just trying to impress a girl by murdering people, which is really weird. And then you set it up that like, oh, but at the end, for reasons, like,
he all of a sudden has a plan.
Right. Like,
and also the Death Note has like 50,000 rules in it.
Right,
that, like,
exactly.
The show never had, and like,
right.
You can like, if you tear the page out and burn it, like that person doesn't die. I'm like, what?
Well,
what?
and then some
Why?
of the
Because
stuff,
it's convenient for the plot.
Right. Well, and then some of the stuff that I was like, wait a second. So like, you could have even done really cool stuff with that would have been really interesting. Like, so for example, Mia writes, let's say she doesn't know that rule. She doesn't know that, or like she doesn't know the rule that you can write. And again, it's like, my brain is going 50 miles an hour at like, not even, it's triple that. Like, what would have been so fascinating is if, let's say Light, okay, he and Mia become like best buds immediately and they become, sexually entangled just because like that's what we have to do in every movie for whatever reason, and they're murdering each other, so they're crazed and happy together. If
basically Twilight.
Oh my gosh, if Light would have kept rules from her that she didn't know, so that scene when they're in the dance and he goes out there and she tells him like, I wrote your name in the book. It's kind of interesting. I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. Now we have some power dynamic. It's still a horrible movie, but at least there's like some stakes. But the way they did the Light getting his name burned, or the page with his, was just the most bullcrap thing ever. Like, page falls from the sky and falls into like a burning barrel. I was like, what the frick is this? What would have been more interesting to me, Mia doesn't know the rule about you can control someone before they die for however long. And they're standing up on this Ferris wheel, and she has the notebook, and all of a sudden she pulls out a lighter for whatever reason, and Light just gets this grin on his face, and she pulls out the lighter, and she goes to his page in the notebook, and she tears out the page in his notebook, and she sets it on fire, and she walks off the Ferris wheel and dies, and falls to the ground and dies. And Light comes down or whatever, and like Mia gets ownership, and then it turns out that he frames Mia for being Kira, essentially.
Kira, yeah.
And then to me, that is so much more interesting at the end, because all of a sudden it's like, yes, that is the brilliant Light that I know. He pinned it on someone else, and he pinned it on someone who loved him and all this crap, and he manipulated the crap out of them to do what he wanted them to do. And in the end, he ended up just throwing their life away so that he could keep on doing what he was doing. But they didn't do that.
Yeah.
He falls out of the sky, somehow magically lands in the ocean. Some dude who's a pedophile over on some other part. You're getting what you wanted, Chris Rogers. Anyway.
Yeah.
But it's...
So all in all, it's a trash film. And So it's a bad movie and a very, very poor adaptation of the source material.
Yeah. And this is my final thought. I think I'm so ramped because it's burnout partially from watching really bad stuff like 3 weeks in a row. Yeah. So I think I'm just like, I'm at it. But it's this suspicion that I keep having that people like, this is more of a joke than anything, but it's this suspicion that like dads with kids who want to be writers and like certain things that are hip are like, oh, Johnny, I'm working on this show called Death Note. And he's like, oh, I love Death Note. Let me write my fanfic about it. And like they end up getting to be the one. And I want to be respectful because I know that these are artists too and they're doing things, but it's just things like that where it baffles me that in the middle of like an hour-long conversation, I can come up with a more interesting scene at the end that still uses all the set pieces that you have already established and just does like 2 things differently throughout the entire movie that immediately injects the intrigue that was present in the show. Yes, have Mia and Light be best friends right away. Yes, have them go off and do all their crazy murderous sociopathic actions. But make it that Light is keeping rules from her. And make it that we know that Light is keeping rules from her. So in the end, when things go belly up and he's at he's in this situation where it's like do or die, he's got the grin at the end because he gets to have the last laugh because he outsmarted her.
Yeah. And I think for that to work, the characters have to be consistent.
and that's another major flaw.
Yeah.
And so that can't happen. Yeah. But anyway, let's go to Ghost in the Shell. I don't want
my final thoughts. I think the movie was basically like somebody just heard the premise and then saw the poster and was like, oh, I'm going to make a show without watching the anime. And they just made a movie. Like they heard the names.
Or they like read the Wikipedia
this was like
summary.
This was like an unfunny Super Mario Brothers.
Yes.
That's
absolutely.
It was like somebody didn't actually understand what Death Note was.
Right.
And they just took all the visual aspects.
Yeah.
And not even all of them. They just took some of the visual aspects and kind of made a weird horror / Final Destination type movie.
Teen drama.
Mixed with a little bit with Twilight. And it came out very, very poorly. And if you hold the original anime close to your heart, do not watch this movie.
Avoid this movie like the plague.
It will destroy you.
Or if you just want to
I don't think we can handle much more.
I can't do it.
So moving on to Ghost in the Shell. Let's discuss the anime like we did the other one first. What were your thoughts? Because we watched it together.
Yeah.
And I actually watched it the second time before I watched the live action. What were your thoughts when we watched it the first time?
So I'm going to say very little on this, and I'm probably going to defer to you, actually, having watched it freshly. Mm-hmm. I think when I remember first watching it, I loved the animation. It's got that older, it was in the 90s, right, 90s, when it came out?
I think so it's got 95, I believe.
Yeah, so it's kind of got that fuzzy 90s anime feel, and it's just cool. Like the cyberpunk aesthetic and just... they're telling this very cerebral story, and it's just a very interesting movie. My reaction when we first watched it was like, okay, I've watched a classic. I didn't love it. Like that was kind of my feeling. But then again, I didn't know a lot about it. I just knew that it was revered as one of the better anime films.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, and I found it for fairly reasonable at Best Buy. So let's just give it a shot. And it's only like an hour and a half.
I'll have to see after this what version you have. Because I think there's a couple versions of it.
Oh, interesting.
In 2004, I think, if I'm remembering
I have
correctly,
an anniversary,
they, for some reason, at some point, they altered it.
Oh, interesting.
And made it, and people online were saying it's worse. And I don't know if that's the one we saw, because I rewatched it, And I really enjoyed it the second time. Because I had the same feeling as you.
Sure.
I was like, okay, I can see why
Yeah.
people hold this up, but I don't get it. Like, I didn't feel like there was a story. I didn't feel like there was anything I was supposed to understand. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It kind of felt like going into it, it was going to be like this comment, like a classic, like, cyberpunky, like, commentary on humanity and transhumanity and, like, what does it mean to be human? And the first time I watched it, I was like, I didn't, like, maybe I just don't understand Japanese culture enough to, like, understand what I just watched.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of, like, older anime, like, because I remember I watched Serial Experiments Lane, and there's, like, almost no dialogue in that show, at least that I remember. It's very, like, atmospheric and very, like, relies on visual cues that I don't think I was picking up because, like, it's Japanese. And that's how I felt with this one when I first watched it. I was like, maybe I just didn't pick up what they were laying down. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how I felt with it. I didn't hate it, and I didn't dislike it. I think I just didn't know what I was supposed to feel or come away with.
I didn't get why people liked it as much.
Yeah.
Like, I could understand, like, from an animation perspective.
Yep.
But I didn't get it. But then the second time I rewatched it the day before, I think last Sunday maybe, I rewatched it, and I really enjoyed it the second time. I don't know if it was a different version or what, but I completely got the story. I understood the characters, and I understood, like, the motive behind everything. And
did you watch it after watching the live action one?
No.
So you watched it? Okay. So
I'm definitely glad I watched it beforehand.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what happened, but I enjoyed it a lot more. And, like, I now see, like, why people enjoy Ghost in the Shell. And I also found out there's, like, 4 different shows set in the same universe and like 3 more movies and like all this stuff that I did not know about. So yeah. So I enjoyed it the second time. I definitely think it's worth rewatching and not maybe looking into what version you have because the one I watched I think I rented it on Amazon for like $3 or something, and it was fine second time. So then that got me excited to watch the live action one. Yeah. Which I watched. So
definitely.
I don't know what's happening, but I think, like you said just a minute ago, like, I think I'm getting burnt out on movies, to be honest. Like, after watching all these TV shows and, like, seeing what long-form storytelling can do and, like, reading books and reading comics and, like, seeing what you can do when you're allowed to breathe a little bit and not being so confined to, like, a short narrative. And I think short narratives can be good, too. There's plenty of movies that are, like, really well-crafted, but I think what I've been noticing is, like, I just don't enjoy most movies because, like, it's just, I feel like it's just really hard to capture, like, that magical feeling in a movie that like makes, and I like superhero movies and I like DC's movies and like all this stuff. So I'm not saying I'm like a film critic or anything, but like, the reason I enjoy those movies is just because it's like fun superheroes, getting to see like your favorite heroes beating each other up on screen. But by and large, I think after watching Ghost in the Shell, I realized I don't really like action movies in a sense, or at least maybe this kind of action movie.
So how would you define or differentiate this kind of action movie versus like a superhero action movie? Whether it's like the actual action itself or the narrative, or...
I think it's the narrative.
Sure.
I think the narrative in this movie, basically the movie just felt like it didn't need to exist. Like, it felt like we've already gotten this from other movies that did it way better. I think, like, because to start off with, like, I think the anime was not really cyberpunk in a sense, like in a visual sense. It was more just like Tokyo mixed with Manhattan style, like large skyscrapers and like on the ground kind of looks like Chinatown, like very cluttered and like, but not like Blade Runner basically. And I feel like they went that route, which visually I'll agree it looks dope. I love cyberpunk stuff, but I feel like we've already gotten that with like the Blade Runner 2049 aesthetically. And like it had like the action feeling of, like you said in here, the Matrix and stuff like that, but like 2019, 2017 version of it. But like it kind of just felt like a piecemealed version of stuff we've already gotten that's better in a sense. Yeah. And I think my overall impression is I would watch it again. And it's a fun, enjoyable movie, but I just think I'm burnt out on movies for some reason. So like after I watched it, it was kind of just like, I don't know.
Definitely.
But that's my general impression.
Yeah, that's an interesting proposition, because I Granted, I feel like I've been out of watching visual media for a while, just because of like schedule constraints.
That's not to say I'm watching
like
a ton of stuff either.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. But I think it's interesting that I feel like, and especially I'm trying to envision this coming as a maybe like an intermediate writer. Like I don't want to say in terms of like that I'm actually good, but I went through a college degree in like creative writing, and I had to study it, and I had to like produce like an 80-page work, and it's hard. Like it's really difficult. So it's not to diminish the work or that just to say like, oh, well, it's crap, so it's crap. But there's something to be said that I, for a long time, and I feel like it's just starting to click now for whatever reason, and maybe it's just because we've been so saturated with really bad content, is just like simplicity is gone in movies and TV. It feels like every show and every movie and a lot of other content is trying so hard to tell this very complex story with like rules and all this world building, and like every movie, unintentionally or not, is kind of suggesting almost like a Lord of the Rings or like Narnia or like, and I'm just throwing out those like big, or even like Harry Potter. Like just there's all this stuff that exists outside of just this own story. And I think of the stories that we look to as inspiration for like how amazing they are. And I think it's almost like the things that I love are either simple on the surface and they remain simple, or they're very simple on the surface, and the draw of the show, thinking of like Attack on Titan, is it slowly feeds you information that gets your imagination running about what actually does exist outside the boundaries, instead of giving you two all at once of like, here's, there's Titans and they're actually this, and there's these people doing this, and all. It's like little by little you start seeing these things, and so you're basically experiencing exactly what the characters in the show are experiencing. And I've heard, can't remember which, I want to say it was Jordan Jacks who I worked with, that was his advice, is he's like, you need to have, in writing and with stories, you need to have like two effects. You either need to be so far ahead of your reader that they're walking with your characters and your characters are learning just as much as the audience is learning, or you need to have the characters know so much that the effect of the story is kind of like keeping the reader guessing of like, can I trust this guy? Like, what does he know?
Like unreliable narrator.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of.
So there's kind of these two things. And I think if you give them everything and then just kind of tell a overly simplistic story, or like an overly complex story, it just gets too muddled. And I feel like with the stuff specifically that we've been watching recently, it just feels like it's just too much. And I think, and to segue into Ghost in the Shell, the live action, I actually really enjoyed it. And I think because to me, in a certain way, it was more simple. And I don't even think it was as simple as it could have been, even relative to the original film and stuff.
Yeah, I was actually going to argue the opposite. I think
interesting.
It's not complex.
Sure.
I just think there's too much.
So
they're trying to do too much.
Yeah.
Like, it's trying to be a cyberpunk, like visually crazy like movie. It's trying to like be an action movie. It's trying to have this like cerebral, like transhumanist ideology sort of thing. It feels like it's like trying to do all of these things that like can mesh together, but like the reason I really enjoyed Blade Runner 2049 was because it was slow. It was very subtle, like, and that's a reason a lot of people hated that movie, was because there was no action in it. And I think like that movie knew exactly like when it should allow the viewer to like breathe and to take in like the visual set pieces and the character motivations, and kind of like just slowly pulls you through. And that's why I like the original Blade Runner 2, is like there's not a lot of stuff going on really other than like what's happening on screen. Yeah. And this movie just felt like it was an action movie trying to be smart in a sense.
That's interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think Matrix did that really well. But that was the 90s, early 2000s. And it kind of felt like it was trying to be a similar sort of movie.
Sure.
And I agree with you. I think like if I was in a different frame of mind, I would have enjoyed this movie, and I definitely think I'm going to rewatch it at some point. Yeah. When I'm in a different frame of mind. I think we're in a
we're salty.
We're in a certain, and I watched it before Death Note, so I wasn't even that burnt out yet. But I think like for some reason it just feels like there's a lot. They're just trying to do a lot of things in a sense. And I'm curious what you mean by simple, because maybe we're on the same page, just different sides of the coin.
No, I actually agree with you, and And I don't know if it's necessarily that they're doing too much, because I think the things that you described are actually the whole reasons that I really enjoyed it. Like, I actually liked their take on the cyberpunk vibe, because I know there are a lot of people...
Visually, it was fantastic.
Yeah, because I know there are a lot of people that were really angry with how Cyberpunk 2077 looks, because they're like, Cyberpunk isn't sunny and like bright, and it's like, okay, so this is going to be interesting to see.
It's
like
a change.
Yeah, it's a change, and so and I think again, it's kind of gets gatekeepery when you're like, oh, this genre can't be this thing, and I think the thing is that what I mean by simple is I think of like Death Note, and like kind of comparing these two movies. Death Note didn't stay in the US and didn't even stay in just the city that they were in terms of like Light's effect on the outside world. Whereas with Ghost in the Shell, Major is constrained to like her city and her job and where they're going. And so I felt like it was like constrained, almost like Homecoming in a sense. Like, yes, like Tony Stark comes in and whatever, but like they don't travel outside of New York, and he's not pulled into this grand adventure where they're like fighting the Scorpion on the moon or something. Like, it's just in its own zone. It's more grounded.
Yeah.
I think there's complexity in the midst of like that simple setting, but I think to me, and maybe this is where I agree with you, and I would propose that it wasn't necessarily that it was an overly complicated story, but they didn't make an already... I really agree with your point that they did something that other things have already done better. And I think specifically in terms of the idea of like human versus machine. And have you seen Ex Machina?
Yeah.
Okay, so I almost wonder if this movie would have been really good if they would have done more of like an Ex Machina twist towards like the middle, if not later portions of the act. Where if like, I feel like, again, kind of like talking about that idea of like revealing information, is that Major already has all the information, and we as the viewer already have all the information. That she, like from the very opening scene, it's like, we took your soul and we put it in a robot. And you're like, okay. Like it just drops you in like that.
Yeah,
and
they basically just start with the assumption that we're idiots.
And I think,
and we're not going to be, because I mean that was the hard part about the anime, was like figuring out really what they were trying to say.
Definitely.
And in this one, they just told you exactly what they were trying to say.
Yeah, and I feel like it's almost, the anime and the live action were almost like two extremes, where I feel like the anime didn't tell you anything, and that was to its detriment, at least in my first watching it.
The one you watched, yeah.
Whereas the live action, it felt like it almost gave me too much, and I think because I was kind of comparing those two specifically, it felt more palatable, and I think I enjoyed it more. But I almost wonder if the movie would have been more interesting if they kind of executed an Ex Machina reveal and kind of played with the psychology of like what happens when you are like this human. Maybe this is a bigger... Sorry, I'm like processing 15 different things that like stories are doing. And maybe this is one of the bigger things that keeps happening in like stuff recently, and why I haven't really liked a lot of modern stories, is that it's like they're not... The characters really aren't driven or like forced to change. Like Major doesn't change or grow. She just kind of like does stuff.
Yeah, and this was one of my complaints. I actually didn't like Scarlett Johansson in this movie.
I agree.
Not because of the
whitewashing thing was even narratively explained, so
dumb,
that was stupid. But regardless,
but I actually didn't like her in this role. She felt kind of stiff in a way, and maybe that was intentional because
it's like she's a
robot.
So.
But I think in the anime she didn't. She talked kind of like a robot, but she moved like a human. In this one, she kind of had this weird like.
She was always kind of like
she had like weird, her chest was like puffed out, but she was like slouched a little bit.
Yeah, she had this like weird contortion whenever she stood. Yeah,
so it was just this.
Yeah, I agree.
It felt like her character just felt weird. Like she was trying to be a robot.
Yeah,
but like I think the whole point is she's not a robot. Like she has a human mind and soul.
Right,
and the body is the part that's like quote unquote a robot.
Yeah,
but like she's still a human. But she like was behaving like she was a robot. Like a robot brain in a human body in a sense, and it just felt like kind of weird.
Yeah, and
also like the part in the anime was weird because they use nudity a lot just because of the way she turns invisible and stuff.
Right.
And I'm fine that they didn't have that in the movie, but like whatever she did not work for me. Like
no,
it was weird. Like she was like naked but not really naked. I was like, why did you like? Couldn't you have just had some?
It just
like a cool like
it did make sense.
Couldn't you have had like some sort of cool suit that can turn invisible? Like that part of the technology wasn't relevant to the story.
Right.
Like we don't need to. it doesn't need to be logically consistent. Oh, like she can't have any clothes on to turn invisible because that's how the invisibility.
Yeah, I was just like
no,
such a fan.
For the anime,
yeah.
it's a fan service thing, but in the movie, it was like now it just looks awkward.
Yeah,
like,
it's just weird.
Why does she like have this weird form?
And
like,
she's like standing weird, and she's
yeah.
like, "I'm gonna get you." But
so like I think the character, like the models, just felt weird.
yeah,
for me.
I'm trying to process like how I want to address this movie.
Also, I think because
Yeah.
I was looking up afterwards, this movie actually isn't. It's confusing because this movie actually isn't an adaptation of that
anime.
movie.
Yeah,
They use some very specific scenes
Sure.
from the anime because the director was inspired by them and wanted to see what they look like, and those scenes were pretty dope. Like
those are probably some
the
of my
chase
favorite.
scene and then the fight in the water
Yeah.
where she's like flipping him around and
Yeah.
stuff, or like that spider tank. That
Yeah,
was pretty
definitely.
dope. But it was actually the story comes from like the anime, I think, like the second season of the anime, like the show. So I was kind of like watching it because of the set pieces, expecting it to be an adaptation of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of confusing in my mind in that sense of
Mhm.
like, what are they really trying to like adapt here?
Yeah.
So,
I don't even know what to say. Like,
the hard part with this one is like, I think we're just better at talking about things we like vehemently hate or like really love. Like a thing that's just like
well, it's
fun.
almost like mediocre. Like,
Yeah,
it
it's like-
was. That was kind of my coming away from it. It was like it wasn't really bad. It wasn't amazing. I didn't hate myself after watching it, which was fresh. That was a fresh feeling after all the movies that we've watched recently. But I think the thing that I keep wrestling with is it's like I don't know if it's necessarily just a Ghost in the Shell live action thing, and I think that's part of the why I'm like I keep hitching is I'm like there are so many other things that do that too. Is it's just like characters who are doing things that like aren't really motivated by who they are. It's just like what they need to find out.
Yeah.
Like I think I'm tired of like. And maybe it's also because there's just, I feel like there's just a series of unfortunate events where like Captain Marvel did the same exact narrative thing where it's like, oh, like you don't know who you are and you don't know what you are. And then now we watched like Ready Player One and it's like, here, spoon feed you all this information and like force all this stuff into the plot that doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. Like Death Note. It's like,
I think with movies, it's very easy to take for granted our capability to understand things.
yeah,
And that's what it seems like. The things that you and I, and maybe this is like because this isn't made for us in a
Mhm.
sense, like the original materials may be made for us, but like the things that you and I enjoy are like having to figure out these things and piece them together and kind of like you said before, like the cerebral kind of like getting that payoff of like once you finally like piece, like some of the most fun parts in Attack on Titan are like when you finally like figure something out before they tell you and you're like, oh, they're not going to do that, are they? Oh no. And then it
Yeah.
happens and you're
Yep.
like, I deserve to figure this out because like they have been laying down all these little pieces hoping
Yep.
I would, and I did. And in movies, I think they just get rid of all that
Mhm.
in a sense, or at least in these movies we've been watching, they get rid
Definitely.
of the stuff and they just have like this kind of like nice palette. Like they have the nice cyberpunk setting. They're like, oh, look at this cyberpunk movie. All of you cyberpunk fans, come and
Yeah.
check it out.
Yeah, exactly.
And we watch it and we're like, oh, that was kind of cool. Like, that was fun. But then you, like, think about it and you're like, but, like, what were they trying to say? Like,
yeah, and honestly,
and I think, like, movies don't need to say something because, like, thinking back to, like, the Marvel versus this, like, why do I think one works and one doesn't as well?
Mhm.
And I think the reason Marvel works is because, like, they're not trying to be something it's not. Like,
Mhm.
they know that they're action movies. They know that they're, like, these crazy comic book action films. So, like, the stories are heartfelt often in my mind, but, like, they're not complex narrative stories. Like,
yeah,
the stories are often just, like, hero has a power. Hero needs to overcome own insecurities to, like, use power properly to defeat bad guy. Like,
Sure.
kind of like it's just the hero's journey over and over again. But, like, in interesting ways that work with like the action and the set pieces and the bad guys and like the different stakes that happen with different superheroes and how their powers work. But
Yep.
like the story itself isn't making some meta commentary on like human identity and stuff. And I think Ghost in the Shell doesn't work because like it's both trying to be like this
cerebral, very
cerebral,
deep
like
discussion.
deep discussion on humanity, and trying to be this like bombastic action film that's like fun and fun for the whole family. And like I don't think those two things mesh
Mhm.
in the way that they wanted them to.
Yeah,
And like I said before, I think it works in The Matrix because somehow they got it to jive in
Yeah.
a way that works, because I think they leaned more into the action and they laid off the commentary.
Yeah.
Like, they left that to, like, the background. They left that to the people like us who want to read into that stuff.
Well, and they
didn't force it down the throats of anybody else.
Right.
And, like, somebody who just wants to see a dope action movie goes and watches The Matrix, and they're like, dude, that was cool. And, like, I think that's fine. But then, because even the directors have said, like, we didn't want that, like, the commentary on, like, technology to be the forefront of the movie. We wanted it to be the awesome kung fu action scenes, and, like, but it's still there. Whereas this movie was, I feel like it was trying to have both up front. Like, it was trying to be a cool action movie and visually, like, yeah. I think that's where my mind is with it, and
definitely
why it felt off to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is another interesting thing too that I would posit is that here we go. I don't think people, and we're not going to dive into why this has happened, but I don't think.
Yeah, our discussion has kind of shifted to, like, why are we not having
everything
fun?
Suck. I feel like when I think of examples of things that I've really, really enjoyed, it's because I'm rooting for the characters or I feel rewarded watching it. And so when I think the thing of, like, thinking, okay, not even just Marvel versus DC, but, like, why Marvel's movies are objectively as films better than DC's movies is I don't want Cap to die in Endgame, and I'm gonna bawl my eyes out because he's a good guy and he and he's fought and he's led this team and he's been an upright standing dude, and he might have to give the ultimate sacrifice to save humanity.
Yep,
that's powerful. Like,
his character's been consistent.
Exactly. It's like, no, yes, of course, there's this grand commentary on, like, sacrifice and giving all these things. But, like, there's that feeling of dread going into Endgame of, like, there are people in this franchise that I've emotionally invested in and seeing them grow and become better people that, like, I don't want them to die. I don't want them to go away. Like, I'm rooting for them to win, and I'm going to be devastated if they don't. Whereas in the live-action Death Note, and, like, even with, like, the DC movies, at least when they're trying to do their cinematic universe, and Ghost in the Shell, it's like, why are you doing anything that you're doing? It's like, I don't know who the Flash is. And I think that's why Aquaman and Wonder Woman are the better of all those movies, is that it's like,
we get to know the character.
You get to know who they are. And all of a sudden, it's like, with Aquaman, I'm not a king. I'm not, look at me. I beat people up in bars, and I'm like a burly fighter. Like, I'm a blunt object is the line, you know? Or like with Wonder Woman, it's like, I'm a fighter. I want to be a fighter. But then she sees war, and all of a sudden it's like devastating of, like, this is what people do to each other. This is horrible. Batman versus Superman, it's like, our moms have the same name, so we're not gonna fight anymore. Like, we're best buds. You know, it's like, there's things that it's like, I don't get that. That's stupid. That's a dumb reason not to do something. Or with, like, Death Note, it's like, oh, you were bullied and you have a bad childhood. Like, that sucks for you. Like, I don't understand why you're doing anything that you're doing. Or with Ghost in the Shell, it's like, well, I don't know if I'm human or machine. I don't really freaking care. Like, there's no interesting feeling of, like, I'm not rooting for Major to sort that out. Like, because there's no consequence of whether she does or not.
Yeah, and I think that trying to, like, root this more back into the conversation of, like, and I think in this movie they made that the conversation. Mm-hmm. But in the anime, like, Major doesn't have that internal conflict.
Exactly.
Really. At least in that story they were telling. Mm-hmm. And maybe I haven't seen what it's really adapted from, but I feel like they were leaning too much into the fact that her character was conflicted. Yeah. And I don't think Major is supposed to be conflicted like that, in a sense. I think...
Right.
Or at least in the way that they made her conflicted. And it felt very forced at times, because it was always, like, expositional. Exactly. It was always like, I'm conflicted, so I'm going to run away. Yeah.
You know, and I think I 100% agree with you, and I think maybe that's the big issue, is when they do something like that where it's like they're conflicted but there's no cause, I think that's the problem. Like, it's just like, oh, you find out at the end, it's like, oh, you were, you know, like, stolen by this government agency and, like, forced to, you know, become a robot against your will. But even then, it's like, I emotionally resonated with the mother, like, more than I did Major.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a problem. Like when you go, like when that whole scene happens, or spoilers, that whole scene happens where Major walks into this lady's house that she just like somehow gets the address from this like creepy terrorist guy, which again, that's a whole another issue. But when she goes into this house and there's this woman who like lost her daughter and she's like devastated. She still has her room set up the same. And she's like, yeah, this is where my daughter was. And like, I loved her to death. Like she was such an anarchist and just didn't want to do anything that I said. But like, I loved her and I miss her and I wish she was back. But I know she's still out there. And it's like that character I resonated and I'm rooting for more in the entire movie than anyone I've met so far, or even Goggles. I don't remember what his name was.
Bateau, I think.
Bateau.
Yeah.
I liked him more than I liked Major.
Yeah, he was one of my favorites.
Like, it's just because it's like you have this dude who's like the most human, and who just like goes around buying meat and giving it to stray dogs, and he's just like there's like a line that he says where she's like, "Why do you like feed these dogs?" And he's like, "I don't know, like I just kind of get them, and they get me." Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like that moment alone, you're like, dang, I kind of like that. Like, that's like a fun characterization. Major has no character. Well, because she's a robot. She's a terrible robot. She's not a good character. She's not written in a way that I'm interested in finding out who she is.
Yeah, I think what we're getting to, trying to like ground it, is you and I always talk about story. And I think a lot of people who listen to this probably think all we care about is story. And I think really what we care about is things being meaningful in a sense. And I think that's
a good clarification.
Based on what I've been learning in the past month or year or so, whatever, in storytelling and stuff. Yeah. I'm not a professional in any sense, and just based on what I've read and stuff, like I think for me, story doesn't always have to be the focus. There's plenty of other things about a story or a book or a movie or whatever that can have meaning. And I think like whether that be the characters, whether that be the story itself, whether that be like the meta commentary, whether that be the setting, I think all of those things can have different meanings. And I think for me, if a movie or a show or a book or something is trying to say too many things at once through more than one of those avenues, like you said, the complexity versus the simplicity, I think the reason the original anime worked so well was because I feel like it just let me breathe. I think like they're like the only thing it was trying to say was this subtle commentary on like what is humanity. And I think it did it visually. It did it like through subtle dialogue cues and these things. But I feel like translating that to this movie, they took even though it's a Japanese movie, they took the American route of like identity and different things. And they kind of like had her have this internal struggle, which again, that can be interesting. And
definitely.
It worked really well in my mind in Blade Runner 2049 because like at no point, I don't think during the movie is Kay walking around really like being all angsty about his internal struggle, but like you get these cues where he has this memory about something and he's not sure where he remembers it from, or like he keeps seeing this like little wooden horse that he pulls out of this furnace or puts it in this furnace, and then he goes to this place and he finds that furnace and he finds this little thing, and in my mind I'm piecing together like, oh, is he actually like this thing? Is he an android? Is he this kid who they're trying to find? Like it's kind of like very subtle in the way that they imply his questioning his humanity and whether or not he's because I don't remember if Kay in that movie even realizes he's an android or not, but I think like in that movie they do it very subtly. But again, going back to the Ghost in the Shell thing, I think they just ramped everything up for some reason. Like the setting is just cyberpunk on steroids, basically. Like it's just so intense. Like the characters are weird and you don't know really what their motivations are. And like Bateau, I liked some of the other detectives, but like her character is like, she has this internal struggle, but like what is like, what are you really trying to say here? Yeah. And then the story is like, I don't even remember what the story is. Like there's this weird terrorist guy.
Yeah, who's like going around doing stuff, and then he ends up like, being like, hey, we're actually like similar. Go to this address. And she's like,
yeah, okay. He like ends up kind of being a good guy and kind of being like, I just feel like they didn't know what they were trying to do or say. And I think like in that way it was too complex, and it like,
yeah, that's fair.
I think like the story and the characters and everything was like out of sync the message was out of sync between all of the parts. Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why it didn't work. I think the anime in it, like, I think the anime was just simpler in a sense.
Yeah.
And we've watched it a different amount of times, so we have different perspectives on it. But I think it was just, not as much stuff happened, I feel like. And the bad guy was a bad guy. But like, even that had a little bit of a twist to it, but it kind of like had this different outcome. So I don't know. And that being said, like I said before, I would watch the movie again. I think it's a fun movie. I think it's worth watching.
Oh,
It's got good action scenes. It's got a lot of cool set pieces. Like if you really like cyberpunk stuff, like this is definitely a cyberpunk movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the characters and the story just, it fell flat for me for some, like it didn't feel like it did anything different or new that we haven't already seen.
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to try and do something, if you're going to try and adapt something like Ghost in the Shell, then I think you need to be very acutely aware of what you're trying to do.
Definitely.
And I think they tried to make an action movie out of something that isn't an action movie.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Definitely.
I don't know. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it. I don't know. That's what I feel like.
I agree with
it.
everything you're saying. As we've kind of talked, I think I 100% agree. And I think, to me, at the end of the day, I think what I'm just seeing more and more, and it's really disheartening. And maybe it's always been this way, and it's just now being older, I'm kind of wising up to it in a sense. Is like, depending on what the movie is and what it's trying to do, so for example, like A Quiet Place, like. Yeah, there's like weird decisions that they make of like, why are you having a baby in this post-apocalyptic wasteland where like the kid cries and you're all effed, you know? But it's like, at the same time, it's like, yes, it's a stupid decision, but that's like what humans do. They make stupid choices. And
we're assuming that humans make rational decisions.
Right, exactly. And they don't.
Yeah.
And especially when that's why they lost the kid. And that's the emotional charge, is they're probably trying to replace and fill that void of a kid that they lost, that they feel responsible for losing. And so they want to give a new child a second chance, or a new chance. And like, there's some depth there, but it's all kind of going on in this very like simple setting, and this simple, like, yes, there's monsters that they have to watch out for, and they have to be quiet and do all these things, but you build from there. Like, that's the situation, and you build from there. And I feel like with the live action for Ghost in the Shell, what they did was they didn't focus on what was interesting. Like, okay, let's say Major's having this conflict. Like, maybe she starts hunting down all the CEOs who like killed her from the start, you know? And I think that's what was a little more interesting about the terrorist in this movie, that I felt like I actually grasped more. And so maybe that's why I enjoyed it, was like, he's going after the people that robbed him of being human in a sense, and who like turned him into a failed experiment. I was like, that's interesting. But Major maybe could have been written as a foil character, where instead of being in conflict the entire movie, she like embraces it. She's like, I love this. I love the fact that I can just jump off of buildings and like fly into rooms and turn invisible and all these things. And then she meets this guy.
That's basically the anime character.
Exactly.
It seems like she embraces her like transhumanity.
And so maybe
if
I bet if I watched it, I probably would have a similar response to you, that I would enjoy it more. And so I don't know. I think I'm saddened that I feel like stories in films and games, and recently, pejoratively, not in everything, there's been some amazing things recently, but it's just like telling a more simple tale that lets me live in the world and just actually like root and feel for these people. Because that's a story is empty without characters. And I think we're constantly getting thrust into these situations where there's either all character and no substance, or like all substance and no character. You know, we're in this crazy world, but all the people in it are horrible. Or like, we have pretty interesting people, but what they're doing is stupid. And like, very few things seem to be striking the balance between the two to elevate things. And I feel like the big takeaway for me, and this is just kind of my closing thought, and then whatever your closing thought is it's just simplicity, I think, and not settings, not that you can't have crazy rules and fantasy things or sci-fi or whatever, but just telling a story that like tells a story, you know, something even as simple as like Alien. It's about the whole movie is about survival, but like the things that happen in it are like the story itself is crew is on a space adventure for science, and they're trying to get home, and then they get an alien is on board, and now they're trying to survive. Yeah. And that's interesting. And so you're kind of like rooting for like, who's going to die? Like, what's going to happen? All this stuff. They're not trying to make some grand commentary on like, you know, I think like Ash, like when they like bust his head off or whatever, he says something about like, you know, they were going to be a better species, and you know, they were going to do more than they were going to replace us and all this stuff. And like, that's interesting, but it's like 2 lines in the entire movie. That's the background. Whereas when you start thrusting all these like mixed signals into the foreground and the background, and they all seem to be changing priority, I think that's the effect that we keep getting with things like Death Note, the live action, and Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, I think, and maybe I'm just wrong, but I think with a lot of these things, it's a misunderstanding of what really made these things good in the first place.
I agree.
And in a lot of the instances, I feel like what made Death Note good, or what made Ghost in the Shell good, was because it was an animated television show.
Mm-hmm.
I think like just simply taking it out of that context, I think removes a lot of the stuff you can play with and a lot of the stuff you can do that just can't happen in live action. I think it can happen. I think the right director and the right storyteller, and I think if all of those things could come together, I think something magical could happen. But I think it needs to be somebody who truly like gets the material.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the reason so many of these adaptations aren't working and why we're so frustrated
mm-hmm.
is because like they're just giving it to people who like don't get it
mm-hmm.
in a sense. Like you could be the best director in the world, but if you don't get the like Steven Spielberg, like that dude,
right?
He creates masterpiece movies, like fun, like movies that ride the balance between fun and adventurous and like for the whole family, but also like awesome action and like kind of like a Michael Bay versus like mixed with whatever. Like he makes fun, good movies, but then he gets Ready Player One, and it's like you miss the point, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a sense, and it's kind of like you both need somebody who can make a good movie, but also who gets the material.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing is like maybe the way we read these material, or with the way we watch these shows and the way we watch these movies, that's almost just one perspective in a sense.
Right. Yeah.
So like maybe they do get it. Maybe he did read Ready Player One 50 times and was like, oh, this would be cool, and this would be cool, and this would be cool. But from his directorial perspective, like the things that he found interesting were not the things that we found interesting.
I think you're
and
exactly
so I think
right.
in some ways we have to acknowledge that our perspectives isn't necessarily the right one. But again,
exactly.
The point of doing a podcast in a sense is we get to have the opinion and you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think that's why we're getting frustrated in a sense, is because like the people making these things, and again, there are hugely different motivations behind these things. Like
mm-hmm.
I would argue Steven Spielberg probably had good intentions in mind behind making the film, and I don't think that film was impossible to create appropriately for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it did well in the box office.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those motivations are very different than what happened with Death Note.
Yep.
I think like
100%.
Death Note, like 100% terrible cash grab in my mind.
Absolutely.
And I think like there's different motivations behind all of these adaptations, and maybe there's just too many adaptations. I'm kind of like, I don't know. I want more new stuff in a sense. And like I enjoy sequels, and like
mm-hmm.
I loved Blade Runner, and I think it's probably like one of the most faithful sequels that we probably could have ever gotten from a movie that somebody tried to like readapt from the 80s. Like I don't think anybody else could have given us that good of a film in a sense. And I'm not I keep talking about Blade Runner because in my mind, like adapting a movie 30 years later and getting something of that quality that like is so faithful to the tone and aesthetic and
mm-hmm.
like character motivations of the first film, like
that's not an
Like
accident.
I feel like I don't see that very often.
I agree.
And like it's kind of like one of my bars that I set in my mind when I like watch an adaptation or when I watch something that's trying to like reboot a franchise or like
mm-hmm.
it's kind of like, if you're gonna just do a cheap cash grab, then don't do it at all, please. Like, I don't know.
Definitely.
So
I hear you.
That's kind of my final thoughts. I don't know.
Cool. Well, I think that was a rousing last episode of March. That was it was a brutal month.
Onwards to Rendell.
Oh, crap! I forgot about that. Well,
we'll have to have fun with that one. We'll come up with like a fun game or something.
Yeah, I think that one, dude. Okay, I've got some ideas. I'll pitch them to you after this. So, But yeah, so thanks for hanging with us for Movie March. Hopefully you're not as burned out as we are. Hopefully you also learned what you should stay away from if you value your life. But we've got some more episodes down the pipes coming in the month of April. I had to formulate that sentence. We're going to start April with, it's literally on April 1st.
April Fool's, a little
literally
goof, yeah.
April Fool's Day. We are going to be talking about I think it's from Sweden, I want to say.
I'm going to look this up. I think it was Sweden or Finnish.
It's from Sweden or Finland, but it's called Rendell Dark Vengeance, I believe. So it's a foreign superhero movie, and it looks edgy as all get out. And
a masked superhero becomes blinded by his desire for revenge against a sinister criminal organization.
Dope. So we're going to be watching Rendell Dark Vengeance, I think it is.
Finnish.
Which is a Finnish movie, Finnish superhero. So that, I'm kind of excited. It'll be kind of fun to do that.
See, watching this movie not in the context of an adaptation, I think is going to be a different perspective.
Definitely.
It's just going to be fun.
Absolutely.
Because hopefully our focus is fun.
Exactly. The week following, on April 8th, we will be discussing Shazam, which is DC's next film.
I'm excited for
which
that.
I'm really excited for. Everything's been looking really good with that, so that's going to be awesome. Week after that, April 15th, we will be talking about the Spider-Man PS4 video game that came out at the end of last year in September.
April's going to be a lot of posi vibes, I think.
Yep, absolutely. 4/22, we will be talking about the animated film Batman Ninja, which I am also excited to watch.
Dude,
that looks really dope aesthetically. And the very last episode of the month, I think we would be just doing Endgame. So it'll be the two of us talking
this
about
is gonna be a good month.
Marvel Universe and the closing out and the end of an era.
A lot of movies, so sorry if you're not a movie guy.
Yep.
Or girl.
So hopefully this is a little bit more of a palatable, like upbeat, posi vibes month. It's been rough, but yeah. So those are all episodes to look forward to. You can share any of the episodes that came out this month if you enjoyed them with your friends on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, or Spotify. You can follow the Pop Culture Punks Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pop Culture Punks. I am back on Twitter, so you can follow Phil and I on Twitter at I am Phil Sorensen and at JK in Pop Culture. And Phil also has his I am Phil Sorensen on Instagram as well. If you'd like to send in any topics or things to discuss, you can send those to popculturepunks@gmail.com or leave a comment on our Instagram posts or DM us on Twitter. We've got merch on Redbubble and Threadless, and we've got maybe 1 or 2 new designs coming up. So I'm trying to clear out and go back over old stuff that was kind of done in immature design work that I did just to have things up. So hopefully we'll have some cool, more mass appeal things for people to check out. So we will let you know as soon as those are ready. Next week will be Rendell Dark Vengeance. Until then, we will catch you later on the next episode of the Pop Culture Punks podcast, and we bid you a fond cowabunga.
Yeah.
Job security.